Welcome to Werners Corner, a place of interviews. I'm here with Mr. Alex Jones.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Grand Wizard of the InfoWars branch of the performance artist group, the Ku Klux Klan.
Correct.
He is the glowing red angry jester.
Don't agree with that, but...
the right, and his hunt for truth has made him the sworn enemy of the MSM, or mainstream media.
You know, I'm not sure how I feel about you, Werner. But notice how I use the proper German pronunciation, because I do like that, but... on one side, you seem like a European globalist, and on the other, you have a fine German accent that I think young men here in our proud country could really learn from. These absolute pigs, these bone-thin, low-T, soy milk demons, they must be punished for how gay their lips are.
Interesting, Mr. Jones. I once raised 12 piglets myself. I fed these piglets from my own breast, killing them only when it was absolutely necessary for survival, or when I was told Jared Leto had landed a role. This causes me an immense amount of depression.
Whoa, very impressive.
Yes, Mr. Jones, I did this to teach myself a lesson about what lies at the heart of this universe. Violence and the pathetic mewling of the meekest among us. You, for example, are trapped in a glittering cube of tenderized roast beef.
So?
But your spirit is that of a badger or ferret.
Look, let me tell you something, Werner. InfoWars is not gone. The truth can't just disappear. The channel will now be sent by Morse code along a telegraph system we are installing using liberal prison labor. I call Dan Scavino. He then translates these into a series of interpretive dances he performs for the president.
And this Dan Scavino, is he entirely in the news?
Absolutely. Direct line to the leader of the free world, fighting globalists on the front line, wearing my makeup like a patriot so that the president knows I'm not a threat to him. Werner, I think we agree on nearly everything. We should really sit down and make a sequel to Loose Change together. I'd really like that. I enjoyed that film very much. I've wanted to make a sequel for quite some time.
Loose Change is the most important movie of the last 20 years. I accept this challenge without condition, Mr. Jones.
We don't exactly know who Q is, okay? It's all about ending the deep state.
Alien life, like pedophiles, and it just seeks to tie all of that together.
Welcome, everybody, to an emergency session of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, reporting to you from the front lines of what will surely be known as the Night of Long Knives. I'm Julian, and I'm here with my co-host,
Jake,
the absolute legend, and of course, frontline reporter, Travis View.
Julian, Jake, it's a pleasure to be here.
You can follow Travis at Travis_View.
Julian and I have zero social media footprints as we do not want to give up our location and risk possible harm to our non-existent families.
We might, in time, reveal our identity, but it will be a little bit like those gender reveal parties in America. We're going to make a huge fucking deal out of it. And it's going to look lame. All QAnon-related subreddits are now banned from the platform, cutting off a major pipeline to the mainstream for the QAnon movement. The fallout is incalculable. To give you an idea of the damage, Jake has had to Google how does the Tor browser work several times this week.
It's awful.
Travis, you've been on the ground. You've been weathering this full frontal assault on the QAnon subreddits. What happened?
So this all went down on September 12th. The number one, all of the QAnon subreddits went down. The most significant one is Great Awakening, which had over 70,000 subscribers.
Yep.
And that was just devastating. But they also banned 12 other subreddits, including the Biblical Q, which is the QAnon subreddit for Christians, and this is my favorite, Quincels, which is the QAnon subreddit for incels.
Oh my God. I didn't even know that existed.
Of course you didn't. Sure you didn't. Incels, for those who don't know, involuntarily celibate.
Meaning they want to fuck, but unfortunately not up to them.
Unfortunately, their white supremacism gets in the way of girls getting moist.
So this happened because of threats and harassment. One of the biggest examples that was cited was there's some information collected by Against Hate subreddits, the subreddit that collects information about things that these subreddits do, and a lot of very, very hateful comments towards Hillary Clinton, where they sort of wished death, not just hateful, but like bloodlust. Very. For example, one person said, "I'm surprised no one has assassinated her yet." Honestly. Someone else said that psychopath gets dragged out by a noose and left hanging till she rots to the bone, and the buzzards rip her rotting corpse to shreds.
That sounds kind of tame.
Right.
Wait, wasn't there another? There was another one where someone was fantasizing openly about strapping her into the electric chair.
Oh, yes,
and watching her fry on primetime TV.
Yes. They wanted pay-per-view. They wanted to see
pay-per-view. They want to pay for it on top of it.
Yeah,
they fucking pay pigs. they're like, no, it can't be free. This has to be like the WWF Raw or WWE Raw.
And actually, their bloodlust is misplaced because a lot of experts say that the electric chair is actually the least painful of the execution methods. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Something else that got them banned was this harassment campaign.
Oh, yes.
And one of the biggest things was a harassment campaign against the Satan parody account on Twitter.
Spelled S8N.
That's right.
Hello, Jack. This is Satan. A lot of these guys are sending me messages, and they don't seem very nice.
This is Satan. I've been contacted by several of Hillary's aides. They just requested that there be pizza and hot dogs in hell.
So there were hundreds of people who were sending him insane messages and DMing him, and Great Awakening was part of this campaign. And actually, I got a message from him. I helped him while he was going through this, while the campaign was going on. And just recently, he messaged me. And he said, "This is great news. I'm happy knowing I had a big part in all their subreddits getting banned. It makes all the shit I got so worth it."
Hey, now they have proof that Satan's working against them.
Right.
So all of their Reddits are gone. And even for Jake, someone who doesn't really want to go to 4chan or 8chan, this was like a big source of how it was getting pushed out into the mainstream.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who don't want to go on the 8chan. 8chan isn't even indexed in Google. And so there are a lot of people who that's too hardcore for them, and the information on Twitter is maybe a little too simple. So this was sort of like a nice sort of bridge in between 8chan and Twitter.
There's a lot of disinfo on Twitter. I mean, when you search QAnon on Twitter, you might get 3 people that actually have real drops that are making some kind of attempt at some sort of critical analysis, but most of it is just like a picture of an eagle flying above like Mike Flynn, and then like the words that are like, "It's coming for you."
Yeah.
Hashtag QAnon, hashtag Great Awakening, hashtag where we go on, where we go all.
I found one the other day that actually touched me very deeply, because it was a tweet that is like, it's like a Q tweet, and it's tweeted by a guy who has who's using a photo of like the Punisher, I believe. Like it's like the Punisher. It's the Punisher logo over an American flag,
I've
and
seen
it
that
says
guy.
"Made in the USA" around it. But this was just such a touching tweet to me. This is the tweet. "We are going to make it, gang. The only way left to go from here is up." Like that's like this kind of adorable. If you strip it of context, this is just like an inspirational meme of like, let's get through the day.
Well, yeah, because these people are like, they're like, remember in high school when everybody would go on like Kairos or whatever, which was like the Jesus sort of retreat, and then they would come back with hemp necklaces, and they would all be best friends, and you go, well, what happened over there? And they were like, oh, we can't really tell. It's so special and magical. It's kind of private. Yeah. It's the same with the Q Army. It's like they love each other because the fact that other people exist that believe in the same things they do make them feel less bad about some of the crazier things that they,
To a lot of them, they've found this amazing information, and they're like traumatized by it, and they're like living in this kind of trauma community where it's like, oh my God, now that we know the truth, we can rely on each other. It's cool.
Where we go one, we go all.
Exactly. Yeah. Meanwhile, I think in the same scrolling session, I found a New York Times article being posted on Twitter that said the title was "Hand Feeding Hummingbirds. You can do it, but should you?" And that's why that's when I realized that I'd literally rather a feed filled with the absolute mental insanity that is the QAnon general Twitter community than have to sit through the New York Times fucking headlines at this point.
Yeah, it's exciting. I get it. They paint a picture.
Yeah.
It's an incredible world they live in.
It's that or fucking hummingbirds.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the community, but I wanted to know from your perspective as a crate digger for the records of people's brains melting. What kind of nuggets have you found on 4chan and 8chan? What's the reactions of these communities? What do they think this is?
Well, Q reacted, actually. There was a Q drop the same day. It was Q drop 2165. And Q said, content violations, ? Stay strong, stay together. Censorship will fail. They will attack the most. Those they attack the most are the biggest threat.
Yeah.
So this is a common narrative. It's like the only reason they're attacking us because we're over the target.
Right.
They're attacking us because they're scared.
Yeah.
The stuff we were talking about earlier about these content violations, this is nothing new. I mean, I've read many posts that call for the fantasy of the deaths and punishment of the Clinton campaign and the Obama and whoever and anybody else that's deemed part of the swamp or whatever.
And it's true that I do once in a while see on the left people calling for something like this, but it's more in the vein of we need another French Revolution. But it's a very different sentiment than like this specific woman needs to be dragged into the street, like beaten to death and hung in the public square.
I mean, all you got to do is go to what's his name, Keith Olbermann's accounts on Twitter, and you can find similar.
I fucking refuse.
Sentiments.
I follow a lot of mainstream people, but I just can't with that dude.
There's a foil sub for the Donald, which is like the 24-hour like Trump rally sub. There's a foil called the Mueller, which is so sad because it's got way less subscribers and like way less like interaction, but they want so badly to be the Donald, but it's all it's all from the other side of stuff, and those guys do very similar shit.
It's just run by the Krasenstein brothers.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Who are starting a podcast, by the way. So I don't want to accuse them of anything, but we start a podcast. Weeks later, the Krasensteins announced this.
Yeah, funding by George Soros.
They're funded by George Soros. We're funded by the Russian government.
The other thing that he were doing, they were comparing it to the Kristallnacht in 1938, which is this Jewish systematic oppression where they burned down synagogues and they destroyed Jewish businesses in Nazi Germany. And they did not. Yeah, they take to it very well.
For them, they are the Jews.
Yes. In this situation, they were the Jews
That's
being
amazing.
oppressed.
That's so good.
So
Ain't it like them?
Just like being. So Great Awakening was not just a story; it was like firebombed by Nazis.
Yes, they just got their Reddit stuff firebombed.
Convenient
by the mods.
You only want to be a Jew when it's convenient. I get it.
It's true.
I see how it is.
Yeah, the right wing. It's true. The right wing love to cast themselves as they're basically anti-Semitic all year round, and then when someone does something to them, they're like, "You did it to us, just like you did the Jews." I think Alex Jones also the other day was like, first they came for Alex Jones or something. I mean, he's always loving that shit.
Oh man.
Yeah, they love that shit.
Well, because I mean, it's the most recent. That's totally a lie, by the way.
Yep.
It's not the most recent. It is the most mainstream genocide that people generally
in the Western narrative, it's the only genocide in all of history.
Right.
That's it. There was never any other genocides. End of story. Thank you very much. And good night. Now, cue 15 Hollywood movies about it. No, it is just something that people love to throw into conversation. I love them using like they look up that one word from like a history book, and because clearly if you study the movement, it's very hard to argue that this is in any way resembling anything that was happening back there. But
I will say like I would say more often than not, when I was on Great Awakening lurking around, and somebody would say something like that, like super blatantly violent. Usually the mods would delete it and there would be a comment like no violence, and it comes from this place that we sort of talked about last time. It's like we are the gatekeepers of this information and this Great Awakening. if we look like we're violent, people are going to be turned off from the movement. So therefore, we have to. It's like when you go when you're selected to go on like a debate tournament. Not that I did this or anything. And you know your coach comes up to you beforehand and says, "Now you got to be on your best behavior because you represent all of Fallbrook High School when you go to this thing. So you have to be." And so like there is.
You're at a spelling bee. They ask you to spell onomatopoeia, and you have to hold back. Because you really want to say that Hillary Clinton should be dragged into the street, beaten to death, and hung.
Yeah, and
it's hard. I know. Yeah,
and
high
instead
school
you go,
students all go through this.
Onomatopoeia. Oh, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, Obama's going to pay for all of this. But I think that the Reddit against hate thing that you were mentioning earlier, they had links to the subreddit like posts they were referencing, and they were all still up, right? So these weren't moderated.
Yeah, I mean, they were all still up. They kept archived copies of them.
Yeah,
but they weren't quite as closely moderated as Reddit would prefer them to be,
or as Jake would like them to be.
Yes,
would like us to believe they are.
No, I'm serious. I mean, I also don't dig as deep because the thing is when you go and you are a regular visitor of these kind of things, you can see pretty quickly which posts are fucking garbage, like
you don't even click on
racist,
them.
anti-Semitic. Yeah, I don't even click on that stuff. The stuff that I'm interested is in like the supposed news story that lines up with part of the corruption, the Spygate theory or whatever. So it's totally possible that all of these things are happening in the post that I just go, I'm not interested in that anyways because I don't want to. I don't want to know that these people are fucking horrible.
From what I've looked into, yes, that stuff was happening, and that is the Reddit terms of service. I have obviously. My issue is not with whether or not they violated Reddit terms of service and whether or not that should lead to a ban under, Reddit's specific rules. It has more to do with private companies and the way that information now translates. But we can talk about that later. I'm still interested in going deeper on what are the theories on 4chan and 8chan about what happened. They described it as the Kristallnacht. Yeah. So okay, it's the firebombing of Jewish businesses.
Yeah. Well, another thing that they planning on doing is that on Patriots Awoken on 8chan, which is another QAnon board. They were planning a counterattack.
I clicked that and it scared me, and I quickly went back to IGN.com.
So so there's one post says that there was sort of a plan of attack. It's like number one, meme war. They want to create a lot of anti-Reddit memes.
Oh,
number two, more meme war.
Yeah. Oh, and I saw this too. Is there's a new algorithm that can actually detect for offensive memes. So what I was seeing was a bunch of examples of just written memes where, like, I'm not kidding. On the top square it says picture of Drake looking away like he's not interested, and it goes like freedom of speech, and then in the bottom left square it says picture of Drake looking pleased like he accepts this, and it's like it's them writing out what the memes look like so as not to be a trick, not to trigger the meme censorship tool.
Oh boy.
Another tactic was they wanted to make a lot of subreddits very, very quickly, a lot of pro-Q subreddits. They wanted to create a hashtag campaign, spamming Q-related content all over Reddit. And number 5, this one worried me a little bit, digging on the mods and reporting them to Reddit. So they wanted to find all the mods on Reddit who were maybe responsible for this and then, finding bad information about them.
They mean the like larger Reddit guys, the
admins.
Yes.
I see.
They're not throwing their own at the bus, dude.
Right.
Where they go one, they still go all. Buddy.
Okay. Good.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. You're still going all.
Yeah, they really blame the people who own or are in charge of the platform.
That makes sense.
They've never liked that guy though. They've always thought that he's been censoring. The funny thing about this though is banning all. Like, I feel like they should have slow rolled it a little bit, because banning them all in a single day makes the Q army feel like you were saying earlier, Travis, like that they are over the fucking target. All our subs banned at once. I mean, even I went to some party and a friend was like, "Oh, Jake, did you see that all the Q subreddits were banned?" And I go, "Yeah, why do you think that was all at once?" And he just went, "Oh."
Well,
And
what?
even he, I'm just saying that like
They decided from one day to the next to finally enforce what a lot of other internet companies are enforcing, which is terms of service around, far right and hate language and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it doesn't even seem that mysterious. It's kind of boring, and it's part of something that on a larger scale is worrying to me. But in terms of the Anons, what are the next steps for the Anons? I've heard word of an exodus to Vote, which is like another social media service where it's still cool to say the Jews did 9/11.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about this?
So Vote, so there was a Great Awakening sub on Vote, and they had about 1,500 subscribers at first, but now as of this recording, it's about 6,000.
But what the hell is Vote?
Vote is like a Reddit clone, but not quite as good. Like if you're familiar with Gab at all,
Yeah, that's where
Kind of.
the Nazis also
yeah.
like to hang out.
So it's the sort of like the Twitter is the Gab as Reddit is the Vote.
okay, it's like nobody. There's no teachers at the daycare.
Yes, there's very little moderation, and it's been around for a while, and they have much looser content guidelines. So you'll see a lot of people with usernames that's just a long string of slurs, for example. And so
Yeah.
the anti-Semitism that's sort of present on 8chan, the QAnon subreddit. They specifically forbade anti-Semitism. It was in the rules.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
Vote, that is not present.
Yeah.
Right.
So the Semitism on 8chan goes straight to Vote, unfiltered.
Nice. Okay.
Oh, it must be all a part of a bigger plan to expose the true anti-Semitic roots. On the Great Awakening, there was it was somewhat contained, like you said, like it was somewhat policed. But now they were like, oh, perfect, we'll make all of them go to Vote, and so they'll have to expose all of their of their horrible rhetoric, and that will surely kill the QAnon movement once people see what anti-Semites and racists they all are.
Or what might really happen is that they'll just get more radicalized when they get to Vote.
Yeah, there'll be less of them, but they'll be more radical, and there's not going to be there's going to be less moderating voices, like which is what you liked about some of the
that's
Reddit
not
stuff.
as fun. That's not as fun.
You have less people flirting with it, more people just committed.
Yeah, I like the narrative written, the crowdsourced narratives written around the drops and how they relate to what is breaking in the news. I don't care about I feel like now that it's moving to Vote, like I'm gonna lose interest because there isn't that. And I mean, pardon me for using the word, but somewhat level-headed critical analysis around what's going on. I mean,
Note to fans, Jake will not actually lose interest in that he is doing a podcast for your pleasure related to this topic.
I actually am going to research VPNs once I get home so I can get into 8chan.
But speaking about this idea that the Great Awakening is somehow separate from Q and the possibility that the Great Awakening as a concept might outlive Q, we had a fantastic iTunes review yesterday that I'd just like to read on the air from a certain Mo Luan. So Mo posted this yesterday. He gave us 1 star, and it was the subject of his review was nothing to hear, HEAR, comma, here, HERE. So nothing to hear here.
Okay, but his vocabulary was correct.
Yeah, not wrong.
Okay.
I tried to like this podcast. I listened to each one, but the Pizzagate episode was when I deleted the podcast from my library, and then he has some spaces and some dots, which makes me think he typed back and forth furiously until he finally found the words he wanted to use.
Okay.
0 research done on Pizzagate episode. Not saying it all ties to a DC pizza joint, but a look at WikiLeaks emails and knowing that the symbols that you fools keep laughing at are actually linked to crime as per FBI. Not saying Q is or isn't real. It could be a huge LARP, but it sure has been a catalyst in the Great Awakening. If you're looking for fair, even-handed discussion, you won't find it here. So there is this idea.
You know what, Mo? That's a fair review.
Yeah.
We accept you. We still love you. Because we know that you're going to download episodes.
You can't resist us,
We
Mo.
know you're going to. We know
Mo,
you're going to
come back to us. Mo, add 1 star, and 2 stars is good enough for me, Mo. Also, if you're not Mo and you're listening to this, go and try to outbalance these people and describe us as fine fellows. It does seem to me like one of the risks is that the era of citizen researcher and the idea of open your eyes to the reality is going to become a larger movement that will live on past Q. Maybe Q gets thrown out, but the way that Mo's talking might be a blueprint for what we see happen, right? Of like people saying, yes, Q was something, but he was the beginning of, me looking into shit. And then they wade through all this crazy disinformation and then,
Right.
Yeah, I think the idea of like crowdsourced investigative journalism is sort of like probably a larger thing that's going to come out of this movement.
What's happening here, in my opinion, is that the QAnon movement is essentially symbiotic with how out of touch the mainstream media is. And they love that, right? They mention it all the time. The MSM is untrustworthy. And the further the mainstream media goes down this path of becoming not very trustworthy when it comes to the way they frame things and
Right.
owned by corporate interests, the more these people are kind of vindicated in going to try and find the truth for themselves. Now, whether, they have like a predisposition towards, right-wing or reactionary thought,
Right.
or not, that's going to guide their research. But it is, to me, a reaction to something that's larger than just Trump saying, hey, this is fake news, which is the American public's slow realization that mainstream media is fallible, and that
Right.
even like the institutions that when Trump took power, like positioned themselves as like perfect, protests to him, champions of the truth, like the New York Times or the Washington Post,
Right.
ended up publishing a lot of crazy shit in the 2 years after, and a lot of it was just bad. And a lot of it was even anti-left wing and was just an attempt to do damage control to keep power for establishment Democrats, but they were still simultaneously running on, democracy dies in darkness and shit like that. So it's just something that I'm also
Did you guys see
noticing.
Did you guys see over the weekend when the hurricane hit? There were so many examples. There was this one video of this reporter who literally looked like if he let go of what he was holding on to, that he would be picked up by the wind and taken away. I mean, he's like leaning into the wind and like doing all this, and then in the background, these two guys just like they look like they had just gotten McDonald's and like smoked a bowl and were like trying to find a place to like smoke a cigarette or whatever, and they just kind of walk casually like 10 feet behind him, like totally unaffected by the storm.
Yeah,
and, like,
he's role playing his.
The MSM is like they keep giving these gifts. Like the thing is people are like, the mainstream media is untrustworthy, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, how about this untrustworthy stuff?
Yeah,
like it's just
we publish trash. Oh yeah, well here's an entire opinion piece about hummingbirds.
and fuck hummingbirds, man. I look
fuck
at
them.
I look at those things. They're like flying bullets, dude. If they fly the wrong way and that beat goes into your temple, man, you're done. Flying bullets. I don't like them.
Very bizarre take.
Remember a couple years ago, like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, when that movie with Dustin Hoffman called Wag the Dog came out?
That's a good movie.
And it was totally about how the media creates a war zone when it needs one and all this stuff. And the reaction to the movie is everybody was like, huh, that's neat. Like, I remember when that movie came out and nobody was like, oh man, is the news like systematically like trying to deceive us like for their own corporate gains? Everybody was like, oh, that's real interesting that the news does that.
Wag the Dog
All right.
also, taught the lesson that if a certain outcome is wished by the establishment, the political establishment, they can work with the media to both give the media the best story possible and in the process manufacture proof and consent for a war like Iraq.
Right.
So it wasn't just about the media. It was also in the same way that Bush and his ilk at the time, and even Obama afterwards, they're in constant conversation with journalists, and you have some of the higher editorial teams brokering when they're allowed to release information to the public. That's why the PRISM surveillance system was only revealed about a year after the story was already acquired by, I can't remember who, potentially the New York Times. But they delayed it because they were in talks with Bush and co, because at the time the idea of national security was such a kind of hot topic panic button that they were suddenly the journalism meant negotiating with the people
With
who
the
were
government,
doing
yeah.
this illegal stuff because if we release this now, we're going to put American lives at risk, or it's going to be a danger to national security. There's a great article actually about the writer who did uncover some of this PRISM stuff before even the Snowden story broke. And I think he wrote this article for The Intercept. It was very interesting, but it was, his incredible frustration over the course of a year, like, him basically developing ulcers and just being screwed around constantly because the editorial board would not allow him to release the story and was keeping it hostage while they kind of did these protracted negotiations with the Bush administration. So it's like I kind of feel like, yeah, we've made our bed, now let's lie in it. I mean,
Well, and as it pertains to Q, something very similar is happening right now with these Peter Strzok and Lisa Page texts. I don't know if you guys saw it, but there were all these new texts that got released to Congress over the last week. And one of them is basically them talking about their media leak strategy.
Yeah.
And at first the lawyer was like, "Oh, well, no. They were worried about leaks happening. They were worried about these leaks happening, and that's what they're discussing." But then the follow-up texts are like, "Did you, is the story good? Yep, it's printed." If you look at the thing, it's clear as day that they were taking select pieces of this Russia investigation.
That's literally nothing new. I mean,
it's nothing new.
They just did that to the young African American man who was shot in his own apartment.
Right.
And in an absolute criminal move, they leaked that he has marijuana in his apartment after the man was shot to death in his own apartment by an off-duty police officer that they won't reveal whether or not her blood alcohol level was high.
Right, and they're saying, and so what? It's like, well, just so you guys know, if she had been on duty and she had discovered the marijuana,
she would have shot him in the chest.
She would have shot him in the chest as well to keep him from smoking a little bit and playing Tomb Raider.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, exactly. There's a big risk of young African Americans radicalizing and wanting to explore tombs.
Yeah, and maybe like eat some fucking Skittles or, do some... I'll tell you.
I hear he was found with Cheeto dust on all of his fingers, and additionally, the pause screen of Tomb Raider was on in the background. So, does he deserve to be shot in the chest? That's a question that you have to ask yourself.
I mean, on the one hand, he is championing strong female leads in interactive entertainment. So on the one hand, we can't really speak against that. But on the other hand, the marijuana, the gram and a half of marijuana that was rolled up on his living room table, it could lead to violence. It could lead to...
I think it would be rad if like a cop just walked in and shot someone else in their chest, like in the middle of their apartment, because they quote unquote couldn't tell it wasn't their own apartment. But then later they leaked to the media like, yeah, you may think this person was just an upstanding family guy and someone in the community that like made speeches and was a potential leader, but we found 3 beers in his fridge. Okay? 7.2%, okay? This was craft beer, okay? Pale ale. Yeah. Wildcat. We shot him in the chest.
Terrible.
Yeah, several times. Oh, fuck. And honestly, the cop's face in her mugshot, she fucking looks wasted.
Not good, yeah.
She looks like
Not
shit. She looks
good.
like she's on meth. It's like, guys, please just give us some, fuck. Fuck. And then this has to take up, I don't know how many fucking cycles, and Fox 4 News, which was some local fucking Fox channel, that published the original leaked thing about the marijuana, then published a follow-up article saying, oh, like people are pissed about the marijuana thing and they think it's the raw, it's like you were an accessory in publishing this, you dipshits. It's your editorial board that should go, oh, this is clearly a manipulation by the cops on this, and we should be doing investigative journalism in that we should be looking into her blood alcohol level and all these other information pieces. Instead, they just reprinted like marijuana. And so fuck the media in this case, because again, they're acting as an arm of the authoritarian government. So they're not innocent, and I think that goes for almost all media outlets right now. I see very few media outlets that are willing to publish stories that go against the grain of corporate interest. I see The Intercept doing it. I see Democracy Now! Still willing to do it. But anyways, we can get into that a little.
We digress about our hatred of the media.
So you've been posting about a certain Jessica Ashu and her role in getting the subreddits banned. So who is she, and who or what is Arab Scarab?
So
what?
So Jessica Ashu is the director of policy at Reddit, and on Reddit she posts regularly, mostly really benign things, under the name Arab Scarab, and the only reason that she was mentioned is that she was brought up in a Big League Politics article. And Big League Politics is a website that's sort of been playing footsie with QAnon.
Right.
They've been sort of covering it kind of favorably. And so their angle on this ban is that, oh, this is terrible. They're censoring. They called The Great Awakening the second largest pro-Trump subreddit. Reddit bans the second largest pro-Trump subreddit.
Very bizarre.
Was the angle.
It's a weird
Is that
framing of it.
true? I mean,
it's not. No.
Besides the Donald, what is there another one that is as big as QAnon?
I just think it's bad reporting to call the main QAnon subreddit just the second biggest Trump Reddit. That's not what it is.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. You guys are right.
You know, even if it is pro-Trump, and I think we can agree in general is definitely like about Trump being, you know, fighting the deep state and all this stuff. That's just bad journalism to put that in that context.
Yeah, and the only reason that she was brought up was because part of being a conspiracy theorist is that you have to play like 6 degrees of George Soros.
Right,
and this is the Soros connection.
Okay, here we go.
Jessica Shu was previously a scholar with the Atlantic Council, a think tank, and this think tank has donations from George Soros.
Right, okay.
So the implication was that Jessica Shu was a main player in getting these subreddits banned. But there's not really any evidence that I've seen. I don't think we know exactly what went on behind the scenes quite yet. She may have had a role, but the implication from a lot of like pro QAnon people was that this woman who has a connection to George Soros, she was leading the charge in getting all these subreddits banned.
I've also seen a couple of posts that almost use the Arab Scarab name as this kind of, you know, red strike against her, where it's like, did you know that she posts as Arab Scarab?
Yeah.
And she actually revealed it quite openly in another post. Like, it wasn't she wasn't trying to hide that.
No, it's not
It's just a posting. It's a name, right?
Yeah, it's like a name.
Yeah.
It says Arab in it.
Yeah, right. And the big league politics article, it framed it as Jessica Shu, how some people believe, posts as Arab Scarab.
Yeah.
And this secret shade, it's open. They don't keep it secret.
Yeah.
Some people don't believe she posts like that. Don't you think if George Soros is fun, you know, is giving the kill order to the QAnon ban, don't you think that he would have done it long ago before all the bakers started to put together all of these pieces
before it reached NBC?
Right. Yeah, the moment that Q would have been talking about the release of the FISA memo is when they would have killed it, because they would have gone, oh, okay, he's bringing like classified shit into light, into the public. This is going to come out. We need to kill this right now.
Not only that, but isn't the theory that Soros has a hand in CNN and NBC? Why would George Soros have allowed this story to reach CNN and NBC, hit the mainstream, get a bigger audience, and then kill the Reddit?
Yeah, no, and it's not right. And also, Soros recently came out. He was speaking very unfavorably of Hillary Clinton and President Obama.
Soros is not a
saying that they let him down. So I mean, it's sort of he's sort of losing his holy place in the conspiracy as far as I'm concerned.
It's true that he has become somewhat of a right-wing shibboleth. Like he's this kind of thing where it's like, yes, Soros. And you're like, okay, this is tenuous, but I'm pretty sure it's still Soros. But he pales in comparison to how systematically the Koch brothers bankroll a lot of the alt-right. You know, it's very direct. They fund the foundations and the think tanks and the foundation of then these media outlets directly and openly. And Soros, it's always like, yeah, no, we know it's Soros, but like he kind of doesn't do it openly. I don't know.
Yeah.
Also, if you think that we are bankrolled by Soros, could you please contact Soros and tell him that, you know, we know the check's in the mail, but we haven't received anything yet. We haven't heard any word from his team. And it would be great if some of that money could finally funnel up to us, because I feel like Antifa is like overfunded. I've seen so many Antifa kids with gold chains these days. They're driving nice ass cars and shit. They're still wearing those black hoods, very threatening. They're very violent.
But nice black
But
hoodies,
really
like
nice.
Volcom and, you know.
No, like Comme des Garçons. Like that's Antifa is now dressing in Comme des Garçons. And they have the limited edition hype beast sneakers and shit. And I'm like, where's my money?
Tight.
Where's my Soros money? I'm sick of this shit. I'm not part of the left-wing conspiracy, and I'm sick of being fucking left out.
Yeah, you're sitting in what looks like a screen-printed Akira t-shirt. It looks like, it does not look Soros-funded, I'll say that.
Thank you very much, yeah. And also, I haven't washed in a week, so where's Soros on that? I need a shower.
Yeah, you need a shower and some hard scrubbing.
I ain't shit right for 3 days. George Soros! One of the more worrying developments in the last few decades, in my opinion, is the domino effect that occurred after the introduction of digital journalism. So what I mean by this is with revenue drying up, mainstream news platforms gutted their investigative journalism wings. They closed their foreign offices, and they ushered in the rise of the opinion piece. And they filled round tables with adult children wearing hair plugs and spiritual giants like Ben Carson. So that's been the result so far. Then this was followed by the proliferation of social media platforms, which added a whole layer to it because it rapidly became the main conduit for news distribution. So now these media companies, almost all of which serve their corporate owners over the quote public, either play ball and pay Facebook to get their content out to their own followers, or they risk fading into obscurity. So what I'm personally worried about is that these for-profit tech companies that are run by semi-autistic boy kings aren't really, they don't seem to me to be bound to any clearly articulated morality or even founded or run by journalists. And yet their internal company policies and their terms of service are now the arbiters of what is and isn't fit for publication. And every part of the information chain is motivated solely by profit. So does this worry you guys as well? I mean, this is the other side of the coin for me where, yes, like, I don't think it's a tragedy that Alex Jones doesn't get to fucking jump on his soapbox and yap. Yes, I think it's not a bad thing overall for culture to have Reddit get rid of these boards. But in the long run, are we looking at a landscape in which everything becomes completely relative and you have private companies with no defined moral stance or political stance, just basically determining what they should or shouldn't be banned?
I feel like it's sort of like that already,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got the left that is 100% sure that Russia is, controlling the United States president, and then you've got the right that is 100% sure that Trump was, that his election was meddled with domestically.
Yeah.
Two completely different narratives, even though
I'd
they
argue
have similar elements to them.
I'd argue the left would be best described as liberals in this case,
Right.
Just because
No, yeah, not the left, not
Yeah.
the left,
Right,
not the
right.
dirtbag left.
But I guess what I mean by that is centrist. What's called the left often, and what you just referred to as the left,
Right.
is for me like it's a centrist moderate stance that tends to lean right.
Right.
Politically, at least, just in terms of their actual policies. But yes, you have these two camps, which to me don't represent like the spectrum, but they are convinced of very, very different things. But at the end of the day, I mean, who gets to say what is and isn't right? Because Facebook recently put in place this fact-checking thing, which has given fact-checking rights to a lot of actual right-wing like misinformation platforms that now get to fact-check left-wing. It's just such a mess. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, is this the beginning of the just total? I mean, it does. It feels like we're already there.
Sorry, go ahead, Travis.
Yeah. I mean, it's really crazy that they didn't think of this, earlier. That they were going to be these huge platforms. They're going to need to regulate their platforms, regulate what sort of content shows up. I sympathize. As someone who goes onto 8chan regularly, I'm all in favor of them regulating content and sort of making these sorts of editorial decisions, because I see what happens without it. It's just insanity.
Yeah.
There needs to be some level of standards. Otherwise, you just get a cesspool.
Yeah, and the problem is that we're in a country where regulation is very demonized, and the idea of free speech is, for better or for worse, used as a cudgel against anyone who would regulate anything. But the reality of the structure right now is that when you say editorial and when you say we are dealing with private companies, and private companies answer to their shareholders or the people who've started them if they're still completely private,
Right.
Investors, and so it's not like we have anyone with any moral authority or even training in journalism or in sociology or in any of these humanities. You're basically saying, these people are basically engineers and profiteers.
Yep.
So you have capitalists and engineers getting together to put these platforms together and to try to squeeze $1 out of them. And then we're asking them now to be the standard bearer for, what is and isn't hate speech. It seems to me, and again, I'm not playing the like, well, free speech, like right wing hand, but I'm also incredibly worried with the shift because I know that left wing stuff gets sucked into the same thing. And then they're like, well, got to do both sides. And because of the way centrism works in today's America, I could definitely see that. Oh, yes, we got rid of Breitbart. We also got rid of Democracy Now!, the two sides. And then it's like all you have left is this just...
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
The problem is, too, is the internet being a part of it is a unique aspect of the problem. And the example I was thinking of is that, like, okay, freedom of speech. If you're out on the street and you see somebody that is a different color than you and you call them a racial slur, that's your freedom of speech. But you know what? You're probably going to get your ass whooped. The thing is on the internet, you can say whatever you want with no consequences. And so the problem is I really do think that there needs to be some kind of consequence, but where do you draw the line? Do you go to, if you target hate speech, is it like they get a timeout? Like if you write the N-word 3 times, do you get your internet turned off for 1 week or 3 hours?
And by who? If there's no state-run internet or regulated internet, it's a private company. They're only going to shut you down when it no longer is financially profitable. And that's what we've seen with these platforms. It's either like, oh, I pissed off the CEO directly, like what Alex Jones did with Jack Dorsey on Twitter, or it's no longer profitable for us to let this shit proliferate. We'll get rid of it. So if the final moral arbiter of what does and doesn't get published is the dollar, like the profit margins, that can't be a society that is structured right.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much money to be made in hate and fear,
of course,
and violence.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still like, I was thinking about this the other day. I was watching, I can't remember who it was. It was some actor that was like, speaking out on violence and all this stuff. And I'm like, but all of your movies, it's you like killing 1 billion people in like the most violent way possible. And so it's like, where do you really draw the line? I mean, where do you draw the line? It's really tough.
It is difficult because, and I was reading a Hunter S. Thompson quote, talking about how the potential for America to survive its worst demons and its worst instincts and become something greater as this kind of petri dish for modernity and and a potential post-industrial era. But I just don't. It seems to just be getting worse. It seems to be getting more corporate, more regulated, and that's and that's creating fascism.
It's because we're all so busy fighting with each other that these companies are like, oh, good, well, let them fucking duke it out while we get as much, we squeeze as much money as we can.
Right.
They're not going to make money by saying, oh, you know what, dude, this thing that you posted on our platform, it kind of doesn't fly. Like, there's much more money to be made to stoke, both sides of the fire and let it fucking, burn up as much wood, destroy as much grass and trees as it can.
And it's tricky because you do see that all genocides that have been organized in human history started with a conversation about, like, how do we get rid of these people? And there's an interesting argument. Recently, Chapo Trap House had another kind of inebriated history episode where Matt Christman tried to explore what fascism was, like what the roots were, and how it exists in today's system. And he did notice that the rise of fascism occurred after both like major economic collapses. So the last time fascism rose, it was after the Great Depression, and the contradictions between what capitalism was supposed to provide people and what it really was providing people was used as a kind of tool to put together a nationalist movement that felt like it had the popular, like, get you out into the streets and direct action thing, which was taken from the left, and of course the kind of implacable power before policy that Hitler espoused after World War I, and in reaction to the economy being completely destroyed, which is kind of what we've seen happen in several countries after 2008. Countries that were meant to be Western countries and wealthy countries were suddenly put in a position where they had to do, what they called austerity measures. And austerity measures sounds a lot like what happened after the Versailles Treaty, that was the kind of like settle things after World War I treaty, in which the Germans were plunged into a crazy recession to pay for everybody else because everybody decided it was the Germans' fault or whatever.
Yeah.
But this kind of, gotta squeeze your belt and this is what's happening in America. It's what's happening everywhere else. This kind of idea of the poor are going to squeeze their belts. Meanwhile, you see these industrialists, these capitalists getting incredibly wealthy at the same time. So there's this incredible contradiction. And fascism rises as a reaction to this contradiction.
Well,
it's,
And the wealthy don't even realize that they're wealthy. I was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians the other day with my girlfriend, and and there was a preview for a new Kardashian spinoff called Life of Kylie, and somebody's asking her a question, and they're saying, people who on the outside, they would say that you lead an easy life. What would you say to that? And her answer is, I mean, really? She's like, I mean, my life is, I think the only real difference is that I have nice things.
Yeah,
and that hit me on such I was terrified because it was like, no, it's not just that you have nice things, it's that you don't have to live with the fear that if you don't make enough money, you will be kicked out of your apartment.
Oh yeah,
you don't if you fuck up and speed on the freeway, you might get a ticket that you can't afford to pay. I mean, it's so much more than this, but because everything is all relative, all they feel like is like, oh well, I might have a couple nicer things than you do, which even of itself is is gross to hear.
You heard it here first. Kylie Jenner does not have class consciousness. This podcast is breaking the story that she has no idea that there might be different classes, and that this might be one of the mechanisms that has caused things to happen in history.
My boss too. I don't make any money at all, and my boss thinks that he's overpaying me because he's been rich for so long that they forget what it's like to be poor. So besides all of this stuff that we're talking, we have one class that is always reminded, poor people are constantly reminded of how poor we are, and how it's going to be so much more difficult for us to get the bare minimum of what we need to, pursue life, liberty, and happiness or whatever. But then you have the 1%er, or the rich people who have zero idea. They've completely lost touch. And your media is playing to both of those sides. And it's like...
Yeah, I'd argue that the way that work functions today, in that, we basically developed technology that would allow us all to work less. But instead of doing that, we decided to lionize work and say the work ethic is something valuable in and of itself. You have to go out there and hustle whether you're rich or not. And so you have someone like one of the Jenner daughters who is out there trying to make more money or whatever, who is out there jumping through the hoops, the kind of obstacle course of capitalism and entrepreneurship and all this stuff, which, by the way, no one really needs. We don't need new companies. We don't need anything. We need the technology we already have to start working for actual human beings instead of being completely, kind of folded into the profit margins. But instead, we have people who, at the end of the day, you tell them, oh, you have an easy life. It's like, well, no, I actually worked all day. But what people don't realize is that there is no inherent value in work, that if the end result of your work is that, more trash is in the ocean and that more people are oppressed, they still feel at the end of the day like they've done a hard job. And if you're telling them otherwise, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I worked for every cent I have,
Yeah.
And that to me is a little bit depressing because it means that little by little, old money doesn't exist, right? Old money used to be we have money, and so we have leisure. And now it's we have money, and so nothing changes. You're still just as stressed. Your day is still just as full of shit you have to do. And you have the same mental pressure and fear of losing these large sums of money or whatever, because we're unable to let go of this old concept, which was built in during the industrial era, that yes, working your fucking ass off all day is somehow noble. And at the end of the day, when you get to go tell someone, I'm exhausted, I've been doing this, and this, that is inherently worthy, even if what you did was whatever the fuck Kylie Jenner does.
Yeah, and I would say that at that time it was true that if you did go out and work your ass off, you were able to afford some sort of decent living.
Right.
Whereas now,
but in the post-war structure in the United States, that was true briefly because
right.
there was an immense amount of wealth that was built around an organized economy that happened during World War II, in that the government started to control the economy and say, okay, production is going to have to be rerouted towards the war effort. And suddenly, a lot of these efforts and jobs were secured and were paying a decent amount. Of course, black people still left out, and of course, people were still fucked over in the system. But then the boomer generation after that profited from the expansion of America into other markets. So instead of just being like, okay, our domestic market is booming, now it's like, fuck manufacturing. Other countries will be cheaper manufacturing, and we can become like the upper class on a global level instead of just a local level. Of course, it didn't
Right.
work out that way. We're now many years later, and we've created extreme poverty in our country. Even though we have more people employed than ever before, their jobs don't pay their rent. People work 2 jobs and still can't pay rent or can't pay for health insurance. So it's a totally different world that people were dealing with after the war.
you guys remember like when we were growing up and at like 10 o'clock or whatever, the news would come on and that was it. You got your couple stories that were happening locally, maybe some big things that were happening internationally or nationally. And that was it. You had a very small window for which the news was delivered and you trusted them and that was it.
Yeah, it was like 5 bullet points. It was like who got invaded, blacks are still uppity. Number 3 is like we should look up to this rich person. I mean, it was still bullshit.
It was the same,
but it was simple.
Whereas now, do you guys, and especially Travis, do you think that the 24-hour news cycle, or 24-second news cycle, as people don't even read articles anymore. I feel like the news is how can we influence them with just the headline in hopes that they will just move on past it to the next headline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I read a lot of tweets. I know that they keep trying to make us, more and more shocked, and to the point that something has to be bonkers insane for us to pay attention anymore. I mean, for all I know, that's why I got interested in QAnon. Like the regular normal news wasn't doing it for me anymore.
Yeah.
And so
me too. Same.
Yeah. And so I needed something. I needed like a hit of meth version of news, something insane for me to get interested anymore.
Yeah, we're pro news kink. That's what we are. We're news kinky.
And I think
we just can't get off unless
news kink. That's a new.
Yeah. Do not news kink shame us.
I've never heard that before, but I think we do. We have these news kinks, and I've never seen journalists sort of demonized and held up as like these shining beacons of truth. They're celebrities now. Whereas
but they're defunded too. There's 2 classes now. There's a tiny minority of like celebrity people who are always dumb.
Yeah.
They're incredibly bad at journalism, invariably, and it's just like the biggest face on every television all the time. And then there's people doing real journalism, but they're usually skin of their teeth, and they know that they've sacrificed larger success and money and integration into this kind of mainstream machine. In exchange, they can stay independently minded, which should be the foundation of journalism.
Do you guys think that as we move, like we kind of started the podcast talking about this sort of crowdsourced journalism, do you think that as that becomes more and more prevalent, that there's actually a chance that we might get back to some sort of truth? Or do you think that the echo chambers are too far gone already, and that any sort of crowdsourced investigative journalism is going to still spin its own fucking wheels?
I mean, I of course I'll defer to Travis for probably a smarter answer, but when I think of the idea that news used to be true and now it isn't, I just think that no, it's just that the lie was singular before, and so people could at least agree on this one central lie, right? Or at least there were 1 or 2 lies maybe. Now there's just like a million different ways to frame it. I think now we have access to less tainted journalism, if you can find it. The problem is, it's like saying, hey, we have access to better music if you can find it on fucking Spotify with no context. Like you just have to go search using search terms.
Yeah.
You're right. Was like we do have access to more information than ever, and it's easier to find the truth if you're willing to. But I don't think we're cognitively equipped in order to find that truth, because that requires you to often humble yourself and saying maybe what I believe is bullshit, and so go out and try and prove your beliefs wrong, and that requires a certain kind of masochism, that most people don't possess. Most people want to, they believe what they know is true, and they want to get the endorphins and dopamine that you get when those beliefs are validated.
Yeah, it's true. And, we did talk earlier about how much profit there is in hatred. There's also an immense amount of profit in outrage. And they actually are symbiotic in that, as the ownership of media falls to fewer and fewer hands, it's profitable to run both simultaneously, and the smarter post-truth philosophers and political operatives in Russia that kind of ushered in this era of post-truth, they knew that this was a fact. That's why some of the early Putin strategy around information was to fund both sides. You fund all sides, and you confuse people into a state of like being overwhelmed and paralyzed. So yeah, it's interesting. The idea, of course, the idea of like a perfect truth is very attractive, but I'm not absolutely certain it does exist. I do agree that it's very hard for a society to function if we don't at least agree on some basics, and that those basics used to exist. Did those basics help us not commit atrocities? No. Like, I think our history is full of awful atrocities, worthless wars, and human cruelty. So I'm wondering, what is there a way to accept, just like postmodernism accepts that modernism is over, to accept that fact and truth and all this stuff is not going to exist the same way it used to? And what is then that next stage? I see Travis terrified. We're just we're building his nightmare on air.
Yeah, I mean, this is really one of the things that motivates me to research. Because the world that you paint, where it's like, well, the whole shared truth thing has left the station. That's not going to happen anymore. I hate that. I don't want to live in that world. Probably will, but I would really rather be able to know that I know the same things about the world as my neighbors. I don't know what could be done to prevent it, but it's very upsetting.
It's certainly not a surprise, because you did mention that what got you into all of this is creationism. That is really the realization that my neighbors believe some crazy shit that I don't understand why they believe it, and here we go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And not only my neighbors. There was Gallup does a poll yearly about how many people believe that humanity appeared on Earth 10,000 years ago, and it's like 38% of the country, which is over 120 million people.
To be fair, that might not even be creationists. It's just people who just don't know math about how long the Earth has existed, right?
Or they go, and I, in some ways I'm like this too, where they go, I know that this story probably isn't true, but it feels better to think that there's something. Let me read you some of George Papadopoulos's tweets in the last couple days. They're fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating that this guy was essentially, he created his Twitter. He really hasn't been tweeting at all until the sentencing came out, and it seemed like
all those tweets were like, "Oh, I love my wife."
Yeah, exactly. It was very, very nice.
I love my wife. I love tweeting that I love my wife.
So it starts with 5 days ago. He and his wife are kind of tag teaming Twitter right now. It's almost like they have this joint. It's very, very interesting.
She's the woman who got out of the car with him, like when they perp walked him, kind of.
Yeah. So she tweets. She goes, "Just got this amazing picture!" ! Halper with Downer. Now, Downer was the Australian diplomat who they said triggered the Russia investigation, that it was his interview with George Papadopoulos that triggered the investigation leading into Crossfire Hurricane, exactly. So then George, 4 days ago, Papadopoulos goes, Senator Burr and Mark Warner. So these are two, like, Q guys, basically. I mean, the things that they're pushing for in Congress sort of line up with the Q narrative. He said, if my lawyers are fine with me testifying, I am more than happy to discuss my suspicious encounters with Alexander Downer. U.S. officials who were reaching out to me around that time, Stefan Halper and Putin's niece, and of course, Joseph Mifsud. If I do testify, I also think it's important for me to detail my interactions with U.S. intelligence officials from the U.S. Embassy, London. George Baker, so he's naming names. Gregory Baker and Terrence Dudley both wanted to ingratiate themselves in the campaign via myself. So it looks like he's trying to set up the fact that he was set up. That's what I'm sort of getting out of this.
He's basically name dropping because he knows that this kind of community thinks it's very impressive that he knows the names of people like in foreign governments or that are highly placed. But at the same time, I can't shake that this guy is like the political Martin Shkreli. Like he
totally is.
He's such a little troll bitch.
Now he goes, I am proud to announce that the brilliant legal minds of Pierce Bainbridge. This is like when somebody on my Facebook like books a fucking like entertainment gig job and they name drop. He goes, I am proud to announce that the brilliant legal minds of Pierce Bainbridge have joined my legal team.
This sounds like a guy who's going through a divorce and can't keep it off Facebook.
He goes, after reviewing notes again, it does.
My bitch wife is gonna definitely get what's coming.
Yeah, and at 3 a.m. he's like, not feeling too great, frowny face, in the hopes that like people will just go like, oh, what's wrong, man? Oh, there's a dude on my Facebook.
But
like
because he's like a kind of cool guy, he'll try to like end it with like a whiskey bastard thing. It's like, thank God for my old friend Jameson's.
Yeah, exactly.
Like or something like that.
Or a picture of like a half of a cigarette smoldering in an ashtray with like a glass of scotch.
Yeah.
He goes, okay, so a day ago, he goes, after reviewing notes again, like he took notes on this shit. It seems
like he reads.
He goes, it seems that 2 months after a likely MI6-led operation against me in London with Stefan Halper, the British government decided to deliver me Theresa May's personal congratulatory letter to Trump after he was elected. And then he's just dropping names. He goes,
that's what he's doing. He's like, he's basically saying, I'm a highly placed source.
Besides
Which is like the setup for whatever his entertainment channel will be in a year or whatever.
Besides the fact that I notified the FBI a year ago about my suspicions that Downer was illegally recording my conversation with him, the lead up to the meeting with Downer in London was even more bizarre.
This guy sucks at posting. Just make a Downer syndrome joke and let's get it over with. Come on.
He goes, there is a lot to come.
This guy's cum has a receding hairline. He only listens to bands that have lost custody of their children.
But so weird, so interesting that Papadopoulos, who really is like the fucking like coffee boy that could, like that guy who you know, that wannabe like what do you call it, like a foreign lobbyist guy who's like, yo, I know the people, I was in the place, like I'm the guy. Now that he's like, now that his jail sentence is like just a slap on the wrist or whatever, just some like bullshit process crime, he's like, oh, I'm gonna come out swinging with like my version of what's going on.
I give it about a week until he's like hanging out with Dan Bilzerian and just partying with Paris Hilton, and just like he makes a new life for himself as like George $3 Papadopoulos or whatever the fuck.
I think in a couple weeks you're just gonna get like a very like humble tweet that he's like, oh, apparently I wasn't supposed to talk about any of this, and actually I've gotta have to delete my Twitter. Like that somebody's gonna be like,
You know what's funny is that his lawyer at his sentencing hearing, his whole argument was listen, Papadopoulos, he was a moron. He had no idea what the hell he was doing. He's not a criminal mastermind, and you know what? Trump is a way bigger criminal than he is. They implicated Trump. They said that when he planned the Russia meeting, like Trump nodded in approval, and so they made it sound like Trump was a really bad guy and George is an idiot. But now after the sentencing hearing is like now he's the super secret spy guy.
Yeah, no, they're all spies as soon as they want to brand.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much for listening to another episode of QAnon Anonymous. Please join us on Patreon. You can pay $5 a month for premium content and support our podcast. If you cannot afford the $5, you can go on iTunes, give us a review, give us some stars or whatever to counteract all the MAGA people that are getting very, very angry at us.
For fooling them.
Well, we are fools. We are fools, and we'll do better. We'll investigate what the hot dogs and the pizza meant. Pretty sure this, yeah.
We will look into the signs, these symbols for Gmail and Facebook,
Yeah.
and we will compare them to early Masonic imagery.
Also, a correction from the previous episode, I mentioned Pat Buchanan. I meant Pat Robertson. Pat Buchanan's just a garden variety right-wing douchebag. Pat Robertson is the crazy Christian guy who, several episodes ago I mentioned was instrumental in politicizing the evangelical right. So that's it. That'll be the last time I ever correct myself. We love you very much out there. Follow us on Twitter, QAnon Anonymous. That's also our Patreon. Go and check out Travis_View on Twitter if you want just the finest screen capping in the business and a lot of research and consistent output. And also, his attempt to protect Satan parody accounts from the evils of the world.
I do what I can.
Thank you so much again, Travis, for coming on.
Pleasure to be here.
The next episode you should be hearing Travis on is going to be our adrenochrome / vampire / children's blood episode, which we all look forward to.
I can't wait.
But today we had to bring you the news of the Great Schism, and I think we will see in the months to come what happens to the community, whether they have a better option than going on a thing called VOAT, vote, which just sounds like bloat, but with a V, and whether they can find a new way for the mainstream to keep pumping out some of their stuff. I believe in them. This is they stand together.
Yeah, they'll make it.
Yeah. Where we go one, we go all to another shitty platform.